So, in this week's reflection, I want to focus on logic and emotion, two aspects of our psyche that really impact how we see the world. They shape how we see the world, they affect our mental health. And you'll notice I didn't call it logic versus emotion. I was going to call this video that, but I think that's a bit unfair because it suggests that the two are somehow opposites against each other. And while there are plenty of situations where the logic and emotion don't line up, and I will talk about those, um, I don't think you have to choose one or the other, or I don't think any one is better over the other aspect. And I think this is a good kind of topic to focus on for this week's reflection because I've certainly seen the the balance and the dynamic and relationship of logic and emotion with my clients, and I've experienced it myself going through my week, and I can just see it really from people, overall. We are so different. We see the world differently. We process things differently. And you can see how logic might appear to be stronger in one person versus someone else. And same with emotions. So, um, something that might surprise you is when I have, as a counselor, when I see clients, you might think the sessions are always emotion, emotion, emotion. And it's not. We discuss logic and emotion because that's what each of us have. We have a certain capacity to use our logic. We have a certain capacity to experience emotions. Of course, that looks different within all of us, but we discuss both elements in counseling sessions because they're both important. One can influence the other, but they can somehow always also seem quite separate from each other. This is why it's such an interesting topic to talk about. Um, if you go to like cognitive behavioral therapy, it's the classic model. It's your thoughts affect your feelings, and then your feelings affect your emotions. It's like this linear thing. And in that model, they say, well, if you change your thoughts, you'll feel differently. And if you feel differently, you'll act differently. Um, Indeed, while that's certainly true in many cases, it's not that easy because it's not that easy to change the thoughts because the emotions have such a grip on us. We have to kind of detach ourselves emotionally first before we can do that kind of work. And that's why you have the logic uh, and emotion. I'll give an example. I've had clients tell me this where we're talking in a session and kind of guiding them through how to overcome a particularly challenging issue. And we talk about what do you want and what do you think the problem is. And it's amazing and incredible how self-aware my clients are and how they know the solution. Because I'm speaking to them and they're relatively calm in the session, they're able to use the logical side of their brain with minimal interference. They come up with the solution. And I say, this is amazing, but you have one problem. I haven't heard from the emotional side of you because I'm sure it will have things to say. Because the thing is, in real time, when you feel a negative emotion or emotionally challenged, it starts to interfere with your clarity of mind and the logic and what you need to do. And because we're not driven to act by our thoughts, we're driven to act by our feelings. So it's the emotions that tend to run the show. And I think one reason I think this is the case is because we generally lack the skill of emotionally regulating. And the reason we lack that skill is because I've not met anyone whose parents tell them uh, or teach them how to emotionally regulate. I haven't met anyone who, really has that as the focus of their parenting yet. I haven't met any of my friends when I was in school say, oh, my mum or dad taught me how to, if I'm stressed, I need to do this and this. I've never seen that. And they certainly don't teach it in school, certainly not during my time, um, of how to calm yourself down when you're stressed, how to recognize when you're stressed, how to use your breathing and use your body to calm down if you're feeling overwhelmed? And what does overwhelmed mean? Like there was none of this explanation when I was growing up. And I can see that this is the result of clients who come to me, and not just clients, but people who I see in the street express the same kind of challenges, which is they feel logic runs the show. Emotions don't matter. It's about being smart and logical and just being ruled by the logic. But it's almost like they want to carve out the emotion. Because I've met people in my life who have been like that. I call it the business mindset, which is very much, this is what's good for this company, or this is what is going to be the best outcome, so we're going to go for that. But there's no acknowledgement of the logic. But yet in other situations, those very same people can become very stressed and overwhelmed. And again, I've seen that. And there's no balance between the two. There seems to be this kind of extreme jump from logic to emotion. And through my work with my clients and through my work in my personal life and trying to balance these two things, I've learned two things that I want to share with you. First of all, we've heard knowledge is power. Absolutely. Knowledge is power. But one thing I've learned is knowledge by itself is not enough. Self-awareness by itself is not enough. It's just the first step. So you might know how you should act in a situation based on consequences. So your logic's telling you, if you act angry, this is going to happen. It's not going to be favorable to you. If you act calm, this will happen. It's going to be better for you. All right. So that's what's going on logically. But that is not enough to satisfy how you're feeling emotionally. The emotions need more. So the reason the logic and emotion seem so separate and people are kind of pitting them against each other is because while you know how you want to act, you find you can't when it counts because you're overruled by the emotion. And this goes back to what I said about how we are really, as a society, struggle to emotionally regulate ourselves. Now, if we were taught the skill of emotional regulation, then maybe we would be able to manage how we're feeling in the moment and allow the logic to have an influence when it's needed. But that's not the case. We only know through hindsight when it's too late. That's why they say hindsight is 2020. Like, it's only when you've done something, you're like, oh, I did that thing again, I regret it. Because your emotions passed, and now you can think from a logical perspective. Whereas if you can emotionally regulate, you're more likely to act in the way you want to. So the first thing is, knowledge is power. The logic knows what's best for you, in theory, but that in itself, just knowing is not enough. You've got to put it into action. Okay. And the second thing I've learned is that when I was growing up, it very much was emotions are the enemy and logic is my best friend. Because I did not know how to regulate my emotions, which is why I thought it was the enemy. Because I did not have the skill and the strength to regulate it. But now I'm in a position where I am much better able to regulate it because I've been practicing all these years. It's like going to the gym, exercising regularly. It's the same principle. I've been practicing all these years. I'm doing these weekly reflections. I'm working with my clients. Because I'm able to emotionally regulate, now I see emotions and logic less as two separate things, but more as one combined thing that complement each other beautifully. Because I'm able to listen to my emotions, recognize the signs when I'm getting overwhelmed, recognize when I'm getting stressed, recognize when I'm getting angry. And because I recognize it, I am able to regulate myself, manage the intensity of the emotion, and therefore it doesn't overwhelm me and overtake my thinking. I still have some space to focus on the logic and what I want to do and what is best to do for everyone involved. So they work hand in hand. But what's the missing ingredient? If you feel that logic and emotion are both opposites and you can only really choose one or the other, or you're overwhelmed by emotion, what you're missing is emotional regulation. That's the key you're missing. If you can emotionally regulate, you will find that these two things are not enemies. They complement each other very well. But the key to doing that is not just knowing what to do in any given situation. It's using emotional regulation. Not logical regulation, although some people may need to become better at analyzing and stuff and doing tests and mathematics, whatever it is, to strengthen the analytical brain. Fine. I'm talking more about the emotion because I'm a counselor, and that's the things I work with is the emotional overwhelm. Not just because they're my clients, but because we as a society, like I said, we're not taught this in school. We're not taught how to emotionally regulate ourselves. And I don't know why. Our emotions will be with us for the rest of our life. And our logic will be with us for the rest of our life. But in this society, we're so logic driven. Everything's got to be logical and we've got to be analytical. We've got to process. But what about how you're feeling? In recent years, mental health and talking about how you feel and talking about depression, the stigma's gone now pretty much. Like, especially in the UK, I think it's become destigmatized. You can talk about your mental health and men can cry and there's no longer a weakness, it's a sign of strength. And this is positive. But again, if you use it in the context of really helping your personal development and not just showcasing, look at me, I'm sad and I'm expressing it, and there's no growth on the other side of that. That's bravery if there's growth on the other side of that. And it's not just, for some people, I believe it's also getting attention, form of getting attention by doing this. There's got to be a deeper purpose behind that growth, behind that showcasing of emotion. And again, it's working on the emotional regulation skill. So there's journaling, there's meditation, there's different things that you can do to sit with your emotions, to stay with your emotions, to learn that your emotions are not scary, they're not going to harm you. It might feel very uncomfortable, but check out my video on feeling comfortable, being comfortable with the uncomfortable, because that's a big part of learning and going on that journey of emotional regulation. But essentially, when you can emotionally regulate, you will then see that logic and emotion go hand in hand. And let's say you're angry and you let the anger out when in the moment, you might regret it later, but it just feels good in the moment to let it out because you're releasing that pent up and built up emotion. And I'm going to go back to saying it's like dehydration. They say that when you're thirsty, it's too late. You're already dehydrated by that point. That's what I've heard. Don't know if that's true necessarily. But you've got to keep sipping throughout the day, keep your water levels topped up. If you're thirsty, it's too late. Same thing with this. You can, releasing anger feels great, but if you have the need to release that anger, it's too late because you've let that anger build up. So you might feel fine emotionally, but it doesn't mean that there's not something happening emotionally. That's where the self-awareness comes in, that you can build that skill in. So your job, in order to utilize logic and emotion and make them both work for you and serve you, your job is to practice emotional regulation. Now, you might be very emotionally intelligent and watching this, but you may lack the skills and strength of analyzing and problem solving and using logic to problem solve. In that case, there are going to be exercises that you can do to help, if problem solving more very analytical processes that take you away from your emotions, because maybe that's something you need to focus on. So it's a balance between logic and emotion, and how strong is either one. Does one tend to overpower the other? And try as much as you can to get that balance between the two. Now, I felt this before, certainly, that, man, it wouldn't just be easier just to live purely through your logic. Just use logic to live, because then you're going to make the best decisions in that moment. You're not going to regret any decisions. You know what you want. You're going after it dispassionately, and you're going to just take that action. But then you'd miss out on joy. You'd miss out on, it'd be a pretty miserable life, because there's no focus on the emotion. There's no experience of joy or pleasantness. It's just pure logic. You're living a very functional life. I guess the question is like, would you sacrifice love for not feeling pain? Would you miss out on the joyful experiences of life that only emotions can give us just so you can make decisions that come from the logical side of your brain? That's what I mean. You can't choose one or the over the other, because then you're going to have a very functional, you know, one-sided life. It's not going to be multi-faced. That's the thing with life. It's got to be like fulfilling. It's got to come from different angles. You've got to have to make decisions and use your logic, but also factor in how you're feeling about situations. You might have to make a decision, but you just want to use your gut. You're like, I'm going to, use my heart, not the head. I'm going to go for my heart. Um, these are the kind of challenges we're faced with on a daily basis, and this is what makes life, in my opinion, very fascinating and very complex. But it's the complexity that makes it fascinating. And there are some of us that are, like I said, very emotionally intelligent, very emotionally in tune, but there are others who are not as emotionally intelligent, but they may be superior in problem solving and using logic and their IQ. So again, being strong in one over the other means that you're going to make sacrifices and there's going to be consequences either way. If you're strong in the emotion, you're going to be very emotionally in tune. But then what does that mean? It means maybe that, can you stand to be in very emotionally intense situations if you're really feeling it? Will you struggle making kind of solving problems if it's just purely an analytical problem? And on the flip side, if you're very strong with the logic, you might have no problem kind of using analysis and solving problems through logic. But in relationships, with arguments, if you're getting stressed, how is your kind of skill set there? Are you going to sacrifice that? Are you going to start becoming overwhelmed as a result of that? So again, if you see these videos of logic versus emotion, if you see articles, logic versus emotion, really read them to understand what logic's about, what can improve it, what emotion is about, and what can improve it. But this pitting against each other, that's how I used to think, but I don't think that anymore. And I think that me being a counselor and working with my clients has really shed light on that. One is not better than the other. One is not more evil than the other. They're both there to serve us, but we have to harness our ability to utilize each aspect optimally. And you can only do that by improving your skill set of emotionally regulating yourself, and if necessary, improving your ability to problem solve. So let me give you a personal example, just so you don't think I'm teaching you. This is more for these videos are more for me than anything. But I'll give you an example. I actually did a test to become an air traffic controller, because that's ages ago my kind of dream job. Just being in that role, managing the stress, and an important role, one that I was really fascinated by. But I did the test, and the first test was memory. So you have to remember different sequence, different patterns. I passed that test. But the second test was spatial awareness. So they'd give a shape, not a straightforward shape. It would be like a series of cubes attached together, twisted, and then they'd give you three options. So what they do is they present three other shapes that look similar, but one of them is the rotated version of the shape and the other two are not. And you've got to choose which one's the rotated version. So in my head, I'm like trying to rotate it and I completely go blank. And I'm end up basically failing that test. And they said I have to retry in 2 years, which I didn't. I ended up going to university instead when I got the offer. But I lack that skill and ability of using spatial reasoning. So that muscle for me is very, very weak. But they said that the test people said to me, you can actually practice that. You can get better with that with different exercises. And it's so reassuring because you can improve it. It's not like I have a low IQ and that's just how it is. I don't believe that. It's a skill set that with practice and consistency, you can improve on if you're serious about it. If you know that's something you're really serious about and you commit to, you can improve it. Just like with emotional regulation, with journaling, meditation, if you commit to it, you will improve it. But if you don't commit, that skill is not going to get any stronger. Yeah, I think that's a good place to finish the video. So yeah, my reflection of this week is just how much both logic and emotion come up in my client sessions, and how my clients do tend to struggle with managing the emotional side of things, particularly. Um, and my message is we can become overwhelmed with one or the other. Normally, in my experience, has been overwhelmed by the emotions, but there are things that you can put in place and protocols that you can do to help emotionally regulate. So if you want your logic and emotion to serve you, there's a good chance you have to start working on emotionally regulating yourself. And you'll find that you'll start to see it less of logic versus emotion, but you'll start to see how these two things can really complement each other. Thanks for watching.